What is the scariest thing you have witnessed with your own eyes? My cousin getting attacked by a Rottweiler. We had a neighbor, 14, that had a Rottweiler tied up in their backyard. We always thought it was friendly. We would hang out with our neighbor often. This one particular time my neighbor's sister was feeding playing with the dog. My cousin, 8, and his twin brother went over to join her. One of them got on the doghouse and the dog didn't seem to like that, so it latched onto my cousin's thigh. He jumped down and tried to run away, but the dog pushed him down and grabbed onto my cousin's head and started thrashing him around. I was in shock. I couldn't move and it took me a few seconds to realize what was going on. It was like watching it happen in slow motion, his head being snatched back and forth and blood everywhere. I snapped out of it when I saw my neighbor run towards them and started punching the dog in the face. He let go and my cousin took off running and screaming that he had a hole on his head. I ran over to him and tried to calm him down. His scalp was hanging off his head. I could see the white of his skull. We lived next to my parents' restaurant and the parking lot was full of customers. I called 911 and the ambulance was there in minutes. He was taken to the hospital and had to have his scalp stapled in stitches on his chest and thigh. He was scared of dogs for the longest after that. Arrived at an accident about 30 seconds after it occurred. A friend of mine was driving and rolled the car. She was thrown clear, no seatbelt, wear them FFS, and hit a tree. I found her, did first aid, and helped the paramedics lift her onto the stretcher and into the ambulance. Her body stopped functioning about a week later, but it's pretty obvious she died there, massive brain trauma. It just took a while for the end. That is so dumb. I wear my seatbelt even when I'm driving up the street to the corner store. Sometimes I feel it, like I don't need it. I'm almost there, and then I always immediately put it on, because that is the dumbest excuse ever. It takes literally no time to put it on, and you can't control other people's driving. Edit. Typo. Also, just watch a few videos from r/extreme car crashes. It really puts into perspective just how easy it is for someone else to crash into you with, no exaggeration, absolutely 0 seconds for you to react. Worth mentioning, some posts on there can be NSFW/NSFL, but they are usually clearly marked with flare and the majority of videos are not that bad, and the seatbelt is, in so many instances, the only thing between you living or dying. Just like with everything else you've ever experienced, after a small amount of time it will become second nature, and you won't even have to think about it or really even notice it. Saw an old man slip and die at a bus stop in Portland early in the morning when I was a teenager. That was sad, but what really shook me was the way he was picked up by an ambulance. The sidewalk was washed off and they left. Within 15 minutes people were occupying that space waiting for a bus, and it was like it had never happened. I saw a semi-truck start barreling down the grass median on an interstate highway in Florida, which at first struck me as funny until they started driving into oncoming traffic. We were in a Jeep, so we drove way off the side of the highway in the grass, just as the truck hit a Toyota in front of us, and then slammed into one of the pilings on an overpass. The truck driver died instantly. I tried to work the other guy free, but was pinned in tight, and he died within a couple of minutes. They probably slept through the whole thing. The Toyota had 4 college students driving home for Thanksgiving. I went to check on them after the trucker died. It looked like the driver swerved away, so the truck hit his side, immediately killing him and the passenger behind him. The other 2 didn't appear to be hurt, but were in shock, my friend. And I kept the other 2 talking until the EMT arrived. When I was 15, my mom suddenly ended up in the hospital. Long story short, she needed immediate heart valve surgery or she was going to die. I will never forget saying goodbye to her and holding her for what felt like seconds and decades, and then watching my little brother hug her goodbye too. He didn't understand. We had just told him he was adopted 2 weeks prior, and all he knew was the only person who had ever been a mom to him was about to die. My family all hugged her and waited in the waiting room. 8 hours later, the ER doctor came out and said she flatlined 3 times, but she lived. She was told then she had 6 months to live and was diagnosed with a rare genetic disease that I was then diagnosed with following. That was 9 years ago. No matter what happens in the future, I will thank God, the heavens, or whoever is responsible for giving me the extra time with my mom. She's still going today and very well, but that was rough. Edit. Wow, this blew up. Thanks everyone for the kind words. I wish I was exaggerating, but unfortunately it's reality. I'm grateful for every day with my mom, despite the vast medical complications she has. Life is short. I'm grateful it wasn't as short as I anticipated once. A job I used to work at, my boss had a heart attack in his office and died in the middle of the shift. The office lights were motion activated, so we thought he left to go something as it was dark. I went into the office to get a new radio, and there he was, leaned back in his chair with his eyes wide open. Scariest thing I've ever seen. In late May 2013, I was going to visit my aunt and uncle, who lived in Moore, Oklahoma, and I got there around the 18th. 2 days later, a tornado warning was sent out, and we saw the clouds get darker as time went on, and then I saw a blockage of cloud touch the ground. I watched as that thing grew and came towards town, with the sirens blaring all round. It was simultaneously the most horrifying yet beautiful thing I had and still have ever seen in my entire life. I stood there for about a minute before I got pulled away and brought down to the storm cellar. When we came back up, all that was left was foundation. Mine is a bit silly, and honestly might not be the scariest thing in my life, but I felt like some of the heavier comments could use a funnier scary moment to offset them. While hiking in Japan, I came across a troop of snow monkeys, and one bore its fangs and started chasing me, probably because I wasn't thinking and made eye contact, which they see as a sign of aggression. He chased me for several minutes, and I am pretty sure I felt it swiping at my pant legs. I just had this vision in my head of it climbing me like a tree and biting my face or neck. Told my parents this story when I was showing off pictures from my trip, and the first picture I stopped on didn't have a lot in it for reference. My mom sat and listened to this story in horror. Until I went to the next slide, where you can clearly see that snow monkeys stand no more than 2 feet tall. I think she was picturing something chimpanzee size. Just this past Saturday, I hit the local bar to get some carry-out and a growler. I saw a friend outside and chatted for maybe 3 minutes, when another guy took a step, tripped, and face planted hard into a stepped area of concrete. In the blink of an eye, this guy was within minutes of dying. He began convulsing and vomiting uncontrollably, could not speak, and was bleeding profusely from his head, nose, and ears. He hit so hard that his nose was shattered and his skull split open across his forehead. EMT were stunned and got him out of there as fast as possible. The bartender came out and washed more blood and vomit than I've ever seen from the pavement with buckets of hot bleach water. The scariest part was the speed at which this happened. People were standing so close to this guy, but he went down so fast and hard that there wasn't time to react and catch him. The violence of the impact was shocking. NSFW, graphic. My stepdad committed suicide right next to his plow truck while my mom watched. I wasn't there at the time, but immediately after it happened, my mom called me in an absolute state. By the time I arrived, the police had already taken the body, but the windshield and front corner panel were completely covered in his brain and blood. My mom rode to the hospital having a panic attack, and I stayed to clean up. I drove his pickup into town, brought it to the car wash I had been to dozens of times over the years, and hosed her down. After delivering my now dead stepdad's truck back to my mom's house and pushing the blood trail in the snow up into a mound, I rode to the hospital in my car to see how my mom was. She was pretty loopy. They gave her something, and I remember feeling comforted by that, hoping she would maybe forget part of the trauma she had witnessed. I stayed a while, but eventually decided to head out, figuring I'd stop at my mom's one last time on the way to make sure I didn't miss anything. Really didn't want her to have to come home to any more than she had to. My inspection of the immediate area looked good, with the exception of some weird-looking thing on the same side of the house. The side of the house he had shot himself in front of had a fenced-in area for mom's pups, and the mystery object was directly above a large, homemade doghouse. I walked through the house, entered the side yard, climbed up onto the doghouse and pulled the mystery white blob off the siding. Had the iris been facing away from the wall, I would have known immediately it was his eyeball, but I didn't. I grabbed it and spun it in my hand before his blue iris looked into mine. My heart sank. I don't know quite how to explain the feeling, but it made me physically ill. My guess is that the concussion blast from the bullet blew one of his eyes out at high speed. I pitched his frozen eyeball off into the field, got back in my car, and drove home to get drunk.